joining us this morning. My name's Gudgeon and I'm a midwife. I've been midwife for 25 years. I have an interest in using digital technology to support the role of the midwife and also enhance the experience for women. As a result of the work that I've done over the last few years, I've won a national award for innovation, and I actively participated in the Better Births Review. I now work for NHS Digital as the only clinical midwife advisor at NHS Digital, supporting Workstream 7.
And hi, my name's Howell. I'm one of the project managers here at NHS Digital, and I've been working on the Digital Maternity Programme now since the end of last year, working on a number of projects that we'll be discussing on the call today. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. So just to provide you with a little bit of background about our work, we are Transformation Programme 7 within the Maternity Transformation Programme, highlighted in red there. That is the Harnessing Digital Technology Programme. And that piece of work is handed over to NHS Digital, which myself and Jules and a number of other people in our organisation form the key project team for. And we took our scope for the work that we're doing from 3 key documents. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with Better Births, which was undertaken by the National Maternity Review. But we've also done a number of research ourselves, and we've spoken to a number of people, and we access a lot of key documents and requirements to really speak to users and understand what the needs are out there in the maternity services. So there are 9 work streams overall, and we're number 7, and that's of the Maternity Transformation Programme. So just to give you a little background about NHS Digital, you may be familiar with it as the Health and Social Care Information Centre. We changed our name recently, and we are an organisation that's responsible for Workstream 7. So we access a number of project managers, we've got clinical staff, we've got a variety of expertise, and we're familiar with managing a number of national projects and programmes. So from those 2 major bits of research that I mentioned, we've come up with 3 projects of work. The first one is the digital Toolsets work, which is looking at apps and information providers to make sure that women have access to unbiased, evidence-based information. The second project is all around standards and interoperability. And there we're looking at creating an interoperable electronic record for maternity that can move around the system so that it can be accessed by professionals to the benefit of women. And the third piece is around digital maturity. And the idea there is that it's all good and well us doing those other projects, but unless people actually have the technology, the hardware, the software, and the capability on the ground, then it's going to be harder for them to make use and get the benefits from that digital technology. So we're undertaking a piece of work to map out the baseline of digital maturity across maternity providers. But I'll tell you more about those projects as we go forwards. So I'm just going to hand over to Jules now, who's going to tell us a little bit about the research that we've done in a bit more detail about how we came up with these projects and programmes and who we've spoken to so far. Jules?
This is about the broad engagement that we undertook. A little bit like Magpies, really, I suppose. We used the resources that were available to us. Better Births, as we know, reached out to many, many service users and healthcare professionals. And Baroness Cumberledge last week at the Maternity Transformation Board, in her presentation, identified that 35,000 families were affected by the Better Births Review and engaged with the Better Births Review, and over 8,000 healthcare professionals, which is absolutely phenomenal. The support overdue covered 2,500 women, and then we had the Maternity Transformation Workstream 3, that's the Choice and Personalisation Workstream. They undertook a fantastic survey of just over 7,500 women, and whilst they focused on choice and personalisation, they asked women what they wanted to see, and we were able to, from their outcomes, pull out the digital parts of that and understand where women go to get information, how they want information to be delivered to them. It was an excellent piece of work from Workstream 3. On top of that, we can't pinch everybody's work. We did some work ourselves, and we undertook a maternity survey asking stakeholders their views on digital technology, the great, the good and the not so great, and we had 161 responses from that, which sort of formulated our discovery outcomes and gave us a little bit of direction as to where we needed to focus. And then earlier this year, we very successfully conducted a HOMS and DOMS survey with support from the Royal College of Midwives. We got 56 organisations responding, telling us about the great things that they're doing and what good could really look like. It was a fantastic response and has really shaped and made us think about where we need to focus our work. Not only did we go broad, but we also went deep. And within NHS Digital, we have employed user researchers who are trained to get information from people using different techniques. Sounds like interrogation, doesn't it? But it was absolutely fantastic that we were able to interview women and their birth partners and their families, and also clinicians. And here we also developed our digital expert reference group, again supported by the Royal College of Midwives. HOMS and DOMS were sent out invites earlier this year and asked if they would send along their digital midwife to form this expert reference group. And we meet 4 times a year and we explore different events that are happening around the digital platform, sharing best practice, and more than anything, it's a fantastic networking opportunity. So what I'm going to do is just talk to you now about the maternity records. Now, Better Births, as we know, identified the problems regarding digital health. And for all of us as practicing midwives, there was no surprises. And again, this was also endorsed repeatedly at the RCM conference last week for those of you that were able to attend. We know what's wrong. We know where we want it to be better, and this was just articulated and put into a document that had meaning and value to it. So as far as interoperability and standardization, the challenges that we face are that, well, and I am actually preaching to people that actually know this already, but we confirmed that women don't really want to be carrying around records. Our records are getting larger and larger, and women are encouraged to carry them. And do you know what? Their handbags are just not big enough. Women actually tell us repeatedly that they thought that their records were already shared, that they can't understand, that the GP can't see what the hospital's writing and vice versa. And why can't a midwife see what the GP's writing in the surgery? We've all heard it lots of times before, haven't we? As clinicians, we know that having timely access to information, especially those women that weren't probably booked in your unit and are visiting, we have all, I'm sure, found ourselves in clinical situations where we're making clinical decisions without the whole picture. And we know that this isn't acceptable. We know that it's going to impact on the safety and the experience, and it also impacts on the clinicians. So standardization and interoperability, what value can we add? We believe that, first of all, information must be available to all. Every single member of that multidisciplinary team, and also the woman. It's her record. So we want all women to have that information, but we need to break down boundaries. And when we talk about breaking down boundaries to provide that continuity of care, we don't just mean geographical boundaries. We talk about provider boundaries too. We've got the cross-boundary problems where she's booked in one hospital and then she's on holiday and then you haven't got any access to any records. But we're also talking about system suppliers talking to one another. One of my sort of key issues is the capture once, reuse many times. I find it infuriating that I repeat so many tasks repeatedly for the same woman. And also the women say to us, how many times do you need to ask me my date of birth and my address? You know, our motto really here at Digital is you capture it once and you use it many times. That will save time for the clinicians, but it will also, more importantly, improve our women's experience of the service. And as we all know, that then gives them confidence in the service that they are getting. And ultimately, it's going to improve the safety. So how are we going to address it? It's quite simple, really. We've developed 3 basic stages. we are standardising content that we want to be able to share across the length and breadth of the country. Once we standardise what that content will be, we then need to look at the interoperability. How is information going to move around the systems? And then thirdly, how are the people that need it going to get that information? So this slide here, you may recognise. The diagram to the right was directly lifted from the Better Birth review, and that's the community hub model. The reason that I like to include that slide here is quite simply to explain that we are trying to capture interoperability wherever we possibly can. And we believe at this stage the only areas that are going to be out of scope for the project work that we're doing over the next 2 years is social services and also the parent groups and voluntary organisations. Social services because it's such a vast area to go, we've got to start somewhere. And then of course we've got the parent groups, voluntary organisations, and we've got to consider the ID issues around it. So therefore the scope of the project focuses on the key areas that you can see on your screen. To do this, we've engaged with as many people and organisations as we possibly can. It's not, the list that you've got in front of you is not an exhaustive list. I sometimes think I probably picked them because the colours are nice, but in all honesty, we view ourselves as an enabler to digital technology to help support the healthcare professionals and to support women with the safety of their care. And we are pretty much open to working with anyone that approaches us or anyone that's viewed as a contributor to maternity care. So anyone really, anyone at all. So at the moment, going back to how I explained, the first part of our work is focusing on standardising the contents, because if you are going to move information around, you've got to have the same information, that standardised template to be able to do that. So we've divided it into 5 areas. It's comfortable talking to midwives because obviously in front of you is the most logical segments that we could possibly imagine. We have this slide because we don't always talk to midwives, but as you know, that this is the most logical way to approach this. Progress to date, the key messages that we've done a lot of discovery work around what it needs to look like. As far as standardisation, the expert reference group at the beginning of this year were asked to bring along any records that they use within their units, and we were able to look at everything that's out there, and there are lots out there, and identify the common themes. And basically we realised that everybody is pretty much asking the same questions, we just don't always ask it the same way. So at the moment we're standardising that list, and then from there we will be consulting with peers and also working very closely with our system suppliers. This is about us all blending the work that we've got to do, blending and contributing, and actually all having an active role to play. Parallel to this work, we are also focusing on the personal health record for women and access solutions. You know, Better Birth spoke a lot about women having access to a PHR, a personal health record, and that's something that we are not ignoring. It's something that we are exploring in parallel to this work. And then I thought it was important to also just raise it with you that in addition to the maternity work, there is also a team that are looking at digital child health. It wouldn't make any sense to be looking at digitalising the maternity pathway without considering the child's health pathway. So our colleagues in digital child health are pretty much following the same processes as we are. Fortunately for us, they are slightly ahead, so we're also learning from them. And the idea is that we'll join up the 2 pieces of work.
Hello, back to me now. So the project that I mentioned earlier on around the digital maternity toolset work, I just want to give you a little bit of background about what we've managed to achieve so far. So we're delivering a tactical solution, and the work that I'm about to tell you about took place up until the start of November this year, and we were able to undertake work that was focused around 3 different work streams. It's probably worth mentioning that when we first started out down this path, we thought we would be looking at creating a national app. However, the research that we went through, the different research items that Jules mentioned earlier on, led us to
a slightly different conclusion, whereby we thought in the first instance we would want to look at the national assets that we already have. You can see NHS Choices is mentioned there, and just looking at those tools that we already have built and own as the NHS, and seeing if we can improve them, or what the scope would be to make amendments to those to help them meet better burst requirements before we started to produce something new like an app, which would be a separate entity. So the work that we undertook was around those 3 work streams. The first one was around the Health Apps Library, which had a sort of relaunch almost earlier this year, where they revamped it with a large number of newer apps. And the idea here is that the apps that are on that site have been through a process that's administered by the NHS Choices apps team. So we undertook a piece of work to try and increase the profile of maternity apps via that tool. At the moment, or when we first started out on this course, there were no maternity apps on the site. So we undertook a piece of work to try and identify those most trusted apps and engage with them and support them as they went through the accreditation process. And we also did some wider engagement work. We ran some big webinars with the apps team supporting us to try and reach out to commercial, charities, local maternity apps that are produced by individual providers, to try and encourage more people to use that in hopes of building a community, so that midwives and other clinicians are more confident in recommending the apps that are available on that site. And the second piece of work was around the maternity pages that currently exist on Choices. So we did some user research there to look at those pages and to see if they were meeting the needs of midwives and women. And we came to the conclusion that we could make benefits straight away by trying to syndicate the information that exists on those pages into apps that already exist. So a team there led by our digital delivery manager went out and engaged with a number of apps in terms of trying to create a bundle of week-by-week information. And that's in a proof of concept state at the moment, and we hope to prove that if that works, that could be something that we want to roll out more widely into other apps. And the idea there is that certain local apps take up a lot of midwife time and perhaps a lot of expense to maintain and keep up to date, whereas if we did it once centrally through the NHS Choices process and rolled that information out, then hopefully that would free up midwife time across the country. And then the final piece of work is around the local service offer. So Jules mentioned earlier on that Workstream 3 had undertaken a piece of work engaging with around 7,000 women to understand what they want to know in terms of making an informed choice about the birth option and location. And we undertook a piece of work there with Choices again to try and understand the tool that they currently have in terms of being able to search for individual hospitals. Could that be enhanced so that it was able to support some or all of that local service offer? And could we build a process whereby it was easier for midwives or whoever is appropriate for updating that information to actually keep it up to date? And once again, we've created a proof of concept there. We worked with LMSs and real midwifery units to collect information to populate the templates, and that once again is in a proof of concept state. So as I mentioned there, these things are all part of what we're calling a tactical solution, and this strategic solution is what we hope to do in 2018 going forwards. And the idea being that the research that we've done will help inform that wider piece of work, and we need to make some big decisions there as to what that strategic solution is going to look like in terms of meeting the better births requirements. So these are some potential things we could do, but that decision is going to be made in the next couple of months as to what the strategic solution will look like, and the research that we've done will be really useful to inform that piece of work. And so the last project on the 3 that myself and Jules are talking about today is digital maturity. So it's worth putting a caveat on this before we even start that this is just an initiation, so these plans are still being formulated, and we're going out and we're canvassing people for ideas at this point. So what I'm about to show you is still in development and isn't formally part of our plans yet, but we're interested in collecting ideas from people as to what they think about this. So digital maturity assessments have already been undertaken, in fact, by NHS England at a national level. They've spoken to, at a trust provider level, conducted this research, and they've asked each organisation to fill in a form to describe how they're performing in 3 different areas. We've got readiness, capability and infrastructure. So we've been working with that team to say, can we create a more tailored and more focused version of that asks questions about maternity services which would help us to create a baseline to understand where are the pockets of good and best practice, and where are people struggling with digital maturity, so that we can create that baseline and start to diffuse best practice and focus on areas that perhaps are struggling. And just to get under the skin of that a little bit, we see it around digital leadership, resources and toolkits, access to funding for digital pieces of work, and looking at the actual hardware and systems themselves. So thinking about LMSs and providers and how we might actually go ahead with this, we could reformulate the NHS England version. And once we've done that initial baseline, we hope to actually encourage people to perhaps peer review their work and work together to create networks and break down the silos, so that I think once people start talking to each other more about digital maturity, the ideas will start to flow, and we'll begin to create a network of experts that we can really drive through with initiatives. And once you've got that evidence, the final point around local digital roadmaps would be you'd be able to be better at articulating what's going on in digital maturity and what the needs are. And that could feed into things like STP plans and local digital roadmaps in hopes of really increasing the profile of technology and digital maturity in maternity services. Just to recap then at the end of this presentation, the three major projects that we're working on in our work stream are the Toolset work, the Interoperability work, and the digital maturity work. It's been a great opportunity to speak to you today. Hopefully that's inspired some ideas amongst yourselves. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you very much.